They say retirement is where life finally begins, where the noise fades, and the world slows down enough to let you breathe. That's what I thought too. After 3 decades chasing liars, laundering rings, and men in tailored suits who stole billions without ever pulling a gun, I just wanted silence, a garden, a home with no secrets. But peace is a funny thing. The moment you think you found it, it tests you. Sometimes the greatest threats don't wear masks or carry weapons. Sometimes they wear smiles and hand you a welcome packet. This is the story of how I came to Raven's Hollow to disappear, and how I uncovered something much darker than anything I faced in the Bureau. Not every war ends when you walk away. Some follow you home. Lucas Vance had never planned on early retirement, but after the explosion in Marrakesh that left his partner in pieces, and his hearing forever altered, he no longer had the stomach or heart for fieldwork. 30 years in the Bureau, white-collar crime, financial corruption, and more late-night stakeouts than birthdays remembered. He had paid his dues, and now, all he wanted was silence. So when he drove through the iron gates of Raven's Hollow, a gated community tucked between the red rocks of Santa Fe and the whispering pine ridges to the north, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: stillness. The HOA brochures had promised a harmony between nature and neighbor. The sales rep had shown him plots with old cottonwoods, winding trails, and a creek that sang in spring. Lucas chose the lot at the edge, farthest from the clubhouse, closest to the woods. He moved in quietly. No housewarming, no social dinners, just Lucas, his bees, and the slow rhythm of planting things he couldn't kill. The neighbors mostly left him alone. A few waves, a pie left on his porch by a woman named Deb. Even the HOA president, a tall, silver-haired man named Victor Durrell, made a point to welcome him personally. Retired FBI. Victor had asked with a half-smile, handing over the HOA's welcome packet. "We'll sleep safer at night." Lucas gave a polite nod. "I'm just here to grow tomatoes." Weeks passed. Lucas found comfort in routine. Morning jogs on the trail, black coffee, woodworking in the garage. He was building a bench to place beneath the old tree out back. It was the kind of thing his partner would have called therapy. He didn't argue, but soon the silence began to rust. First came the letters. Your trash bin was visible from the road on a non-collection day. Your exterior light exceeds the HOA's illumination standard. Then the camera installed on the lamppost near his driveway angled just slightly too far toward his yard. Lucas didn't like assumptions. He liked facts. So he scanned the welcome packet. No mention of light standards. No approved surveillance zones. But when he called the HOA office, a woman named Diane, with a too cheerful voice, explained, "We've recently updated community enforcement protocols. It's all part of our smart safety initiative." He let it go. For now, until the next incident. It was a Tuesday morning, early, the sun barely touching the ridgeline, when he spotted a man in a black windbreaker crouching behind his fence. Lucas approached silently. "Can I help you?" His voice was flat. The man stood quickly, HOA badge on his chest, clipboard in hand. "Property perimeter assessment," he said, avoiding eye contact. "You're on private land," Lucas said calmly. "Without notice. That's called trespassing where I'm from." The man mumbled an apology and walked off without another word. That evening, Lucas checked his internet router logs. There, it was an unfamiliar device piggybacking off his network 2 days prior. The device ID matched the new community security hub installed near his property line. He disconnected the router, installed his own firewall system. Then, he went to his workshop, pulled out a locked case, and unzipped the contents: a small, military-grade audio jammer, a forensic USB, and an encrypted drive. Old habits. He didn't want to be paranoid, but paranoia had kept him alive long enough to retire. 3 nights later, it got worse. Lucas returned from a short trip into town to find a folded letter taped to his front door. No envelope, no HOA letterhead. "You were not home during your scheduled yard inspection. Non-compliance has been noted. This may affect your standing." What standing? The words weren't the problem. It was the tone. measured, watching, as if someone was keeping a behavioral log. Lucas turned off the lights and walked out to the backyard. From the shadows, he scanned the tree line behind his house with an infrared scope. For a long time, nothing, just wind and crickets. Then movement. A small red dot blinked once on a tree trunk. 300 feet out. A sensor. Someone was mapping his property. He stood there in the dark, the desert wind tugging at his sleeves. Something about Raven's Hollow was wrong. Not just controlling, strategic. Like it wasn't just a neighborhood, it was an operation. He looked back at his house. Once a promise of peace, and for the first time since he arrived, Lucas Vance felt watched. He had come here to disappear. Now he wondered if someone else had noticed. And worse, if they had plans to make him disappear instead. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table, lights off, listening to the silence around him like an old friend who had turned into a stranger. His eyes traced the red LED blinking faintly from a motion sensor in the corner, one he had installed. This was his house, his land, but it didn't feel like his anymore. By sunrise, Lucas had already mapped the perimeter of his property, scanning for more hidden devices. He found two, one tucked beneath the mailbox, the other disguised as part of the sprinkler control box. Both transmitted data using encrypted signals routed through what appeared to be the community Wi-Fi mesh. That afternoon, he drove into town not to the HOA office, but to a dusty bookstore with a cafe tucked in the back. It was neutral ground, far from Raven's Hollow. He sent a short, encrypted message to an old contact, possible surveillance net within HOA, unusual enforcement patterns, need eyes on tech and legal structure, confidential. The reply came 30 minutes later, still poking hornets. Vance, you never learn. I'm in. He'd need more than one ally. So he reached out to a woman he hadn't spoken to in years, Nina Calderon, a former cyber defense engineer who'd vanished from the tech world after blowing the whistle on a private defense contractor. Word was, she'd been blacklisted. Lucas tracked her to a rental cabin just outside the county line, where she now fixed solar panels and coded in silence. She agreed to meet only because of who he was, and because he didn't ask for favors lightly. The diner was nearly empty. Nina looked older than he remembered, thin, sharp-eyed, guarded. She listened as Lucas laid out the story, the surveillance, the phony citations, the perimeter mapping, the data piggybacking on local mesh networks. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she stirred her coffee once and asked only one question. Have they tried to isolate you yet? Lucas frowned. What do you mean? Nina leaned in. First they watch. Then they test boundaries. Then they start small, subtle social cues, pressure points. Eventually, they isolate you from the rest of the community. Makes the final phase cleaner. No witnesses, no support. Final phase. Property seizure. Asset absorption. Legally. Of course. It's easier when no one cares if you're gone. Lucas sat back. His instincts were right. This wasn't paranoia. It was process. Nina agreed to help. She'd seen this pattern before, in high-tech neighborhoods, in military contractor compounds. It was always the same. Create a friendly front. Mask coercion in paperwork. Build a profile. And then exploit weakness. They needed evidence. Real. Admissible. Unavoidable evidence. Lucas and Nina began building a digital map of Raven's Hollow ownership records, HOA amendments, citation patterns, Wi-Fi signal analysis. The pattern emerged fast and ugly. In just 3 years, 22 properties had been sold at 10 to 30% below market value following long citation campaigns or repeated compliance conflicts. Most of these homes had something in common: privacy, open backyards, or key positioning near community event spaces. Strangely, nearly all were purchased by different shell companies. But Nina traced them back to a single parent entity, a real estate investment trust called New Citadel Group, whose senior legal advisor, Victor Durrell. It got worse. Using a digital backdoor in the HOA's outdated website, Nina accessed archived files the public site had hidden, among them internal memos, surveillance logs labeled by house number, and a behavioral index rating, residence by resistance probability. Lucas's name had a red flag. Subject Lucas Vance, risk category unpredictable, high observation priority, projected strategy, isolation, escalation, forced compliance or exit. He wasn't just being monitored. He was being handled. And Victor wasn't acting alone. HOA records showed that Victor, along with 2 board members and the HOA attorney, were all receiving undisclosed payments labeled as consulting fees from New Citadel. These weren't just ethical violations. They were criminal-level conflicts of interest. Lucas's house wasn't the endgame. It was the prototype. Then came the trigger. Late one night, Lucas returned home to find a construction permit taped to his door. It authorized the installation of community enhancement infrastructure on his backyard fence line. No date, no contact name, just an HOA stamp and a vague legal citation. The next morning, a work crew arrived with equipment. Lucas confronted the foreman, who shrugged. "We're just following orders. Says here, this zone's been reclassified as shared view green space. HOA bylaws section 14G. Lucas demanded the document. They couldn't produce it. He called the HOA. Voicemail. He drove to the office. Locked. Lights off. That night, he opened a bottle of scotch he'd been saving for a quiet milestone. He drank it alone, staring out at the dark line of trees where red dots now blinked like eyes. They weren't hiding anymore. Whatever Victor was doing, he was ready to move to the final phase. And Lucas, he was done waiting. Lucas had seen takedowns before, hundreds of them. From Wall Street suits, laundering millions through art auctions, to cartels embedded in fake charities. But this was different. It was personal and disturbingly intimate. His own backyard had become a chessboard for something far more insidious than corruption. It was algorithmic coercion wrapped in neighborly smiles. He wasn't just fighting fraud. He was fighting a system designed to look legal, and it was time to break it. Nina had finished building a secure surveillance node, a disguised relay that intercepted HOA drone feeds, Wi-Fi beacons, and internal mesh traffic. From it, she traced the gala guest list for the upcoming Platinum Community Investors Evening, set to take place across several volunteer properties, Lucas's backyard included. But no resident had ever volunteered. The HOA had simply voted their usage into existence. What Victor and his team didn't know was that Lucas had already wired his house with passive mics, long-range directional cameras, and even a false breaker box rigged to record any tampering. But that wouldn't be enough. He needed a moment in admission. Lucas stood inside his darkened home. Lights off. Blinds cracked just enough to see the glow of chandeliers being raised in his yard. Caterers in black uniforms flitted between wine stations and modular furniture. Strings of lights hung from the old tree he had once sat under to write. That bench moved, repainted, claimed. Victor arrived precisely at 700, arm in arm with a venture capitalist from Austin. Nina, posing as a hired event technician, wore glasses with an embedded mic, relaying everything to Lucas's earpiece from her post near the catering tent. Lucas watched them through the long lens from his study. The value, Victor was saying, is that we control the regulatory narrative. See, we're not taking properties. We're curating them. No one wants to live next to neglect, so we incentivize aesthetic consistency. And when someone resists, we have mechanisms, all perfectly compliant. The investor laughed. And the homeowners just let you, Victor, sipped his drink. They either comply, or they move. He gestured across the yard. This one, he'll be gone within 30 days. Doesn't even realize his power line easement was redrawn last week. Once we cut services, people stopped fighting. Lucas's jaw tensed. There it was. The final card. Intent. Malice. Conspiracy. Nina's voice clicked in. Got it. Full audio. Sending backup feed now. Lucas opened a secure app. His contact at the FBI Special Agent Sarah Tenley was already monitoring the live stream from an off-site location. She'd seen enough. Warrants authorized. We move in 12. Victor raised his glass beneath Lucas's oak tree. Surrounded by men in linen blazers, and women holding flutes of champagne. To curated living, he said proudly. To investment without interference. To ownership with authority. The applause that followed was short-lived. Blue lights split the driveway in half. Marked SUVs screeched to a halt. Doors flew open. Flashlights. Badges. Voices. Federal agents. Hands where we can see them. Chaos erupted. A guest dropped her drink. Another man tried to run through the rose trellis and face planted into a koi pond. Lucas stepped outside calmly, his presence cutting through the noise like a blade. His voice was firm, but quiet. Victor Durrell, you're under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud homeowners, and unlawful surveillance under Title 18. Victor turned, stunned. You can't be serious. This is a misunderstanding. You mapped people's lives like real estate portfolios. Lucas replied coldly. But we're not parcels. We're people. And you just lost your mask. Federal teams raided the HOA's Smart Control Center, uncovering data profiles, AI-driven prediction logs, and behavioral manipulation protocols. Over a dozen similar HOA boards in other states were flagged for investigation. Victor's properties were frozen. New Citadel Group collapsed within weeks. Civil suits piled on like stormwater. But what hit hardest was the press coverage headlines like Neighborhood Watchdog or Digital Tyranny. And when the HOA becomes the hunter, former residents of Ravens Hollow came forward. Laws were questioned. Communities awoke. And Lucas. He sat under the old oak tree one afternoon, alone. This time by choice. Nina had already moved on. Off-grid again. She left behind a small wooden box, inside a flash drive, and a note. You've made noise, Vance, but keep listening. The system isn't broken. It's evolving. He looked at the garden blooming again. No one dared step on it now. The HOA had been dissolved. A new, transparent neighborhood committee formed, this time elected, not appointed. Kids rode bikes past his driveway again. Someone waved. Lucas raised a hand in return. No badge, no case, just a man who'd refused to be handled. But deep inside, he knew Ravens Hollow wasn't the last.